his belief system
Confucianism
that
is
fits
belief
in
system,
the same box as
as
Christianity and Buddhism.
Christianity and Buddhism.
Hello everyone, this is
Hello
Mark
everyone,
Peterson.
this is Mark
Today
Peterson.
I am at the Korea
I'm at the
Society
Korean
and we are going
Society.
to cut several short videos introducing important topics that we hope classroom teachers can use in their classroom instruction. And our first video today, we're going to talk about Confucianism, and I have with me my guest today. Are you my guest or am I your guest?
We're one another's guests.
One other guest.
This is Linda Tobish, who we all know and love as Toby.
Toby.
Toby is a senior advisor here at the Korea Society, working primarily on education. And let's do a thing on Confucianism.
I would love to.
I would love to.
Let's hope that a classroom teacher can find some good use for this. Confucianism before Confucianism. And what I'm talking about is two phases of Confucianism in Korea, where we tend to think of Confucianism as what we've known most recently in Korean history. And that's a Confucianism that became the way it was in the late 17th century. And what it became was a patrilineal kind of Confucianism. By patrilineal, I mean the Korean word puge-sahwe, which means the father's line, which means the male dominance, which is the issue that gives heartburn to women about Confucianism. And what I've been trying to say is that there's a Confucianism before that Confucianism. And the earlier Confucianism, before patrilineal Confucianism, was much more egalitarian. It was a Confucianism that existed in a society where daughters had equal inheritance, where daughters participated equally in inheritance rights, where marriage could be at the wife's house or at the husband's house. So it was a much more balanced kind of Confucianism. And my saying that Confucianism can exist in Korea is looking at this earlier Confucianism. So the pre-Confucianism Confucianism.
So the pre-Confucian Confucianism, why did it change? Why did it become patrilineal?
Why did it become patrilineal? I think there were two forces that came together. One was they've been studying these texts, Confucian texts, that had been jacked up with a Neo-Confucian ideology that was pushing more of a male line. Confucianism has always talked about the male, the eldest son doing the ceremonies. But Korea ignored all of that. They had everybody doing the ceremonies, taking turns. But the text said the oldest son. So eventually the text came to bear down and say, well, we've got to do it this way. And I think another force that came to play was population pressure. When you have greater population, you've got to be more careful about how you divide your property. And Korea came to the point where they thought, we just can't keep dividing up the property among all the children. We need to have an estate. So let's have the eldest son take care of the estate, and the other sons can be supported by the estate. So it switched based on population as well as on ideology.
Okay, and it also, it would seem to me that also it perhaps grew out of the lack of equality in terms of access to actually rising into government. So the scholars, that was based on taking the exam so that you could actually go into government, become an authority. That was never co-equal in terms of men and women. It was always men. So therefore, if you have this tradition of men being the scholars, and as issues come up with population, then they're going to lean more towards male.
Exactly. And there is this gender bias within Confucianism. And the thing that I find interesting is Korea fought against that gender bias for a long time. That is to say, they had equal division of property. Sons and daughters were absolutely equal. And if there was a household that had only daughters, for example, Shin Saim, the woman who's featured on the 50,001 note, she was one of 5 sisters. And if she had lived 200 years later, those 5 sisters would have been married off and become what Koreans called 출가외인, a stranger who left the house when she got married. She would have been that, but at the time that she lived, she and her 4 sisters, the 5 of them, divided the property into fifths, and they all inherited. So there was a sort of equality, but when I use the word equality in society, the idea that the men control the politics cuts against the absolute equality. But there was economic equality for women. Women functioned in the marketplace. They inherited. They could buy and sell and do things with their own property. They had their own homes in many cases. About half the homes were the house where the women had lived. About half the homes were the house where the man had lived. And so women had equality in that regard. So there were a lot of equal issues, but you're right. Politics was in the hands of the men.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more question that I have, which is, you call Confucianism one of the five great religions. So first, what are the other four, and how can you define it as a religion? Where's the deity?
Yeah. That's the question, isn't it? That's a good question. The other five are Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism. World religion texts talk about the five great religions. But they also talk about the seven great religions, or the 10 great religions. So you can include more if you want to. I picked the five just to emphasize the role of Confucianism, one of the big five. Confucianism played that role because it was a religion, I say. Now, a lot of Koreans like to say Confucianism is not a religion. And there are non-religious aspects to Confucianism, like there's no God. But there's teachings. There's moral teachings, teaching you how to behave. And one other way to look at this is to use the word belief system. If we didn't say religion, if we said belief system, it opens the definition a little bit. And one way I like to look at this is if you look at Marxism, you look at communist states, they very often say Marxism is our only box. It's our only belief system. Nothing else can go in the box. You can't have Christians in the box. You can't have Confucians in the box. You can't have Buddhists in the box, because that's all anti-Marxism. So in that regard, Confucianism is a belief system that fits in the same box as Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism, if it were there, and Islam as well. So, no, I think Confucians would be smarter to say, yes, we are a religion, and to face up to it rather than to shy away from it. And to say, yes, we are a religion gives them the opportunity to say, and this is what we teach. And this is our value added to the society. And it's a different kind of religion. There's no God. And you can be a Confucian and a Christian at the same time. You can be a Confucian and a Buddhist at the same time, although they're contradictory elements, but you can still do that. So that's my take on Confucianism as a religion.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and I hope that those of you who are watching this short video will follow this discussion up among yourselves, and I found it very enlightening. I hope you will too.
I hope it's a good launch pad for your discussion in your classroom. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are a lot of ways to spend your tax refund. Fancy flip-flops.
How did Korea get to be such a prosperous and dynamic country, which is what it is today? Hello everyone, this is Mark Peterson. Today I am at the Korean Society, and we are going to cut several short videos introducing important topics that we hope classroom teachers can use in their classroom instruction. We're looking today here at the Korea Society at questions about history, and I have with me one of the officers here. You specialize in culture and arts. This is Rachel. And Rachel, welcome to the program. Let's talk about history. I gave a lecture last night. We talked about history. Do you have some questions to start us off?
I guess my question is about your work, and I just wanted to ask how your
work and your study aims to really redefine the common misconceptions in Korean history, and what motivated you to start this research?
I've been doing research on Korean history for 58 years. How old are you?
I'm 23.
I'm 23.
So, more than twice your age, I've been working on this. You know, the Buddhists were right. Lifetime is like a second. These things are all relative, and I can't believe it's been that long. But I'm concerned about introducing something to the classroom that is contradictory to what the textbooks teach. And yet, you have to teach the truth. And history is changing. History for most people is misunderstood. They think history is a thing out there they go and look at. But in reality, history is something that changes and needs reinterpretation, because history tells us who we are now and how we got here. And Korea in the 1960s, when I first went to Korea, was a very, very poor place. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. They'd suffered the Japanese occupation, they'd suffered the Korean War. People were desperately poor. Per capita income was $125 per year. That is really, really poor. And if you're in that kind of society, what kind of outlook do you have on the world? You know, and so Korean history at that time sort of told the story of how we got to be so poor, and how we got to be so beaten up, and how we were an unfortunate and victimized people. That was the history I first learned in Korea. History today has to be different, because if it answers the question, how did Korea get to be such a prosperous and dynamic country, which is what it is today, how'd that happen? Well, that's a different set of circumstances than being beaten up. And so what I've come up with is the 20th century was awful for Korea. There's no question about that. But as you look back beyond the 20th century, there were a lot of really happy parts of Korean history. For example, the longest dynasties of any country in the world. Long dynasties says peace and says stability. And that's quite different from the history that I first started to learn. So as a classroom student looks at these different approaches to Korean history, I think it's not just me, but a lot of young historians are starting to look at history in a different way. A lot of young historians, younger than I am. It's a fad among younger, it's a trend among younger historians to re-examine the basic questions. So for a classroom student at a junior high or a high school or even a college, this is a good question. You know, what is history, and how does history play out in Korea? And is it valid to say history of the 1960s is very different from the history of 2023 because the forces that acted on the country to make it what it is were very, very different. So that's how I look at Korean history, as sort of different over time. History doesn't stay the same. It poses a problem in the classroom for students to say, hey, I don't quite believe what this textbook says, because I see Korea as a much more dynamic place and not a victimized place. I see Korea as a more powerful place. And Korean history today, we're seeing these powerful things in their history. For example, some of the best warfare, some of the best artillery was developed by the Koreans in the war against the Japanese, and we haven't heard about that much before. So the more we learn about Korean history, the more it fits the time and explains how Korea could be such a powerful and dynamic country, whereas Korea years ago was a poor, picked on, victimized country.
I guess I do have another question. I guess, do you encourage students to do their own historical research? Is that something you're promoting through your work? And how do you think these students will have access to, I guess, a different perspective on Korean history?
Yes, I encourage students to re-examine what I teach in the classroom. If they don't buy it,
by it.
If they see it
They see
differently,
it differently.
write it up in your
Write
paper
it in your
and
paper.
convince me.
Convince
And
me.
I'll give a
give
student
your
a good
students
grade
a good grade
if they completely
if they
contradict
completely
me,
contradict me,
but they've got a good
but got a
argument
good
that
argument
makes sense.
that makes sense.
That's
the
the college level
college
kind of
level
teaching.
kind of
In
teaching.
high school, it's more a matter of
High
learning
school,
facts,
more
and so
matter
that's a little
of
bit different.
little
But
bit
I would
different.
hope that in high
I
school as
hope
well, a
that high
student
school
would look at the different
look at
facts
the
and say, well,
different
you know,
facts.
Korea
Well, Korea
has had a lot
had
of
lot
turmoil,
turmoil,
but they have tremendous stability,
tremendous
these long
stability.
dynasties,
There are
smooth
long
transitions between
dynasties.
dynasties. You know,
You know,
border
the
between
border
countries that
between
has lasted
countries
the
that
longest
lasts
in
the
the history of
longest
the world is the Yalu River, the Amnokang River between Korea on the south and Manchuria and China on the north.
On the
The
north.
fact of
The
Koreans
fact of
having
Koreans
so many
so
people
many
named
people
Kim
named
and
Kim
Lee and Park
and Lee
is an
and
indication
Park,
of peaceful stability. That's
stability.
another thing a student can
Another
write
thing
about
student-
because Korean names are
Korean
really
names are
unique.
really unique.
Your name is
Your name is
unusual. It's one of the less frequently
Less
heard
frequently
names.
heard
But
name.
Kim, Lee, and Park
Kim
are
and Park,
45% of the
45%
population.
of the
The question is
population.
why?
The question
And
is
the answer
why?
is
Answer
the
is
stable history of
stable
Korea, because Korea
history
did
of
not
Korea.
kill off their kings and their
King,
aristocrats
their
from previous dynasties
previous
the way other
dynasty,
countries
where other
did.
countries did.
So there are lots of indicators of peace and stability. So a classroom student could take that argument, or they could argue against me and say, "Oh, Korea's had all
Korea
these
has had
wars,
all these
and
wars. They
continue
continue
the normal argument. The normal argument about Korea
normal
is
argument
that
about
there's
Korea
so
is
many wars and
many
chaos
war,
and turmoil.
chaos.
And I'm arguing for a
I
different point of view.
different
And the
point
classroom
of
student
view.
has to make his choice. He can
His
use it
choice.
and make a debate
You
out
can
of it.
debate
indeed.
out of it.
So that's my way of looking
That's
at
why
it.
they're looking at it.
Thanks, Rachel, for coming in. Appreciate your questions.
Appreciate
We'll see you
your
next time.
question. We see you next time.